Hey guys, what's up? I'm Steven, and today we're going to see how to create this site plan from Lewis's Kahn Exeter library using Illustrator, Photoshop, SketchUp, and many more. So let's start. Alright, so in this video, we are going to see how to create this image specifically and variations of that image using Photoshop and Illustrator. Mostly Illustrator and some of Photoshop. As always, if you guys want the files, the PSD files, the Illustrator files of this video, and if you want the full length video, which was I think about 3 hours, you can go into our Patreon page and you can support us and also have access to all the files and all the long form videos of the channel. And in case you are interested in learning more about site plans, we have launched a course on site plans and I'm very excited for it. We have a ton of students now and they're all very happy with the course. So in case you're interested, then the links are down below. So without further ado, let's start. All right, so first of all, I want to talk about the reference drawings because without any reference drawings, we wouldn't have anything. Like we're not inventing anything new here. Site plans already exist and there are very good ones. So I hopped onto Pinterest to see what kind of site plans I wanted to do. And honestly, I have always felt a desire to create site plans that look very clean, very crisp, and that don't have that much Photoshop in them. That kind of look like a very high resolution line plan, but it just has that added touch. It has those patterns. It has that interesting thing that it wasn't done in Photoshop, but it was done in Illustrator. So I knew from the beginning that I wanted a very clean plan. And these were some references I got of it. So I had references of different kinds of maps, but they had some interesting patterns, interesting textures to it, and a very monochromatic look, right? So it doesn't have many colors. It just had about 2 colors, which I really liked. And then we had some interesting, then the vegetation had a very important role. Since the library is very square, is very perfect, and it's very symmetrical, everything, I wanted the trees and the landscape to make a contrast of that. So if everything inside the architecture, everything of architecture was very perfect and symmetrical and kind of platonic, then I wanted the nature for it to be irregular, for it to be, not a pattern, not repeated. Everything had to be unique. So that was more or less my idea. And those were the references that I had. So with these 2 references was that we created this image right here. So I want to talk about the model, right? Because the model was a very detailed model. It was very interesting and I really liked it. It's one of the best 3D models I have downloaded yet. And it's no coincidence that this model is as good as it is because it was done by a professor and a team of academic peers that are very interested in architecture, are very interested in teaching architecture, and the best way that they do it is explaining these exemplary architectures. So the website that I'm talking about is Exemplary Architectures. You can type it on Google and it will appear. And the professor's name is Edson Mafuz, which I think is from Brazil. So thank you, Edson, so much. I know that the person that modeled this library specifically was Monica Ecker. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Edson. And thank you to Exemplary Architectures. If you are interested in these models, then you can go to the link down below and talk to Edson. He's a really nice guy. So as you guys can see, the 3D model was very detailed, very interesting. I didn't really have to do anything else in SketchUp. So what I did was I just adjusted a parallel view, a top parallel view. So I pressed Ctrl+1 for it to be a parallel view. Then I adjusted it so I could see the building and the buildings that surrounded it. So I obviously hid some part of the building. So this building has about 9 floors, 8 to 9 floors, I think. And I only left it at 7 floors so you can see the floor plan cut in the most interesting part, or what I thought was the most interesting part of this building. And after I had this, I exported the file as a PDF. So you just go to File, Export, 2D graphic, and as a PDF, you want to export it in a high resolution because we're going to import this into Illustrator and then modify the line. So I exported it and then I opened Illustrator. So as soon as I opened Illustrator, I imported the PDF file. And first of all, what we have to do is clean this model up, or maybe adjust the line weights, because when you export from PDF and from SketchUp, the line weights are very big, and sometimes it just gets too clustered and it's very hard to understand the intensities, the hierarchies, what is being cut and what is not being cut. This took me a while, but what I did was select all the lines. So in case you want to modify the line weight of your files, you can go to select, then you can go to same and stroke color or stroke weight, however you want to identify it. Then you change the stroke. So I changed it. It was it was 1 point or 0.75. So I changed it to a 0.25 because I thought that was a very nice weight. As soon as I had that, I started changing the intensities of the furniture versus the actual architecture. So for the furniture, I selected all the furniture, which was chairs, tables, etc. And then I reduced the line weight much more to a 0.05, I think. And I also selected all the lines and changed the color so it wasn't a true black. It was more like an off black, which I think is much more interesting, and it's a subtle change that can make the image look a little bit better. So this honestly took a while, and after that I wanted to start to add patterns. The patterns, mostly I wanted to add them to the vegetation, since the building is surrounded by mostly green areas, by mostly grass. I wanted to add a pattern to that grass, to those trees, so it could look much more interesting and it could have, give the plan the life that it has. So to add a pattern is very easy. So you can go to the pen tool, and with the pen tool you select your area that you want to select. So in this case it was all the grass area, and as soon as you have your shape tool, you close that shape. Then you go to appearance and you have two options, fill or stroke. Then you go to fill, you double click, and then you can change it to a certain color or a certain pattern. So if your patterns don't appear, you can go where all your colors are. Then you will see a small library. Then you can click on that and click on patterns, then go to basic graphics and select the basic graphic dots, lines, or textures. So in this case, I selected the textures library and I started fiddling around and seeing what textures I liked the most for my grass. You have to take into account that you don't want a texture that is very dense. You want a very minimal texture that if you see it from far away, you can kind of see the texture. If you see it up close, it doesn't take all the attention, because remember, we're trying to show most of all the relation of the architecture of the floor plan with the site itself. So you don't want the grass to take all of the attention. So this patterns thing took a while again, because honestly, Illustrator is not my thing. Like, I am mostly a Photoshop guy, but I want to do more of Illustrator because I think it's a very good program, and it has some things that make our architecture drawings look much more crisp, much more clean, and much more interesting in some parts. And the patterns are something that I think make Illustrator that much better, because there are also patterns in Photoshop which you can add. You can even make your own pattern. But since this pattern is being rasterized, then it doesn't maintain these vector shapes, these vector layers, this vector resolution that is just so good in that is just so good in Illustrator. So as soon as we added that pattern, I wanted to add the path lines, because to the pattern I didn't add a stroke around it, but I did want to emphasize the path, the pedestrian path that was along and around this building, which if you guys see the path in a Google Earth image, you can see that it's very interesting because it's very organic. It's not that straight everywhere, so it has a very nice path. So what I did was select your pen tool, and then you redraw the path and select the stroke, a very light stroke, about 0.25 points or something like that, or something similar. Next, I wanted to fill the walls of the architecture into a solid color, because I think it just looks much better and it just kind of stands out from the rest of the site plan. So what I did again with the pen tool, I selected the walls. Since I knew this was a very symmetrical building, I only had to do some parts of it and then duplicate it and reflect it and transform it and flip it to the other areas. So I know that what you're thinking, you're like, okay, so this is not effective at all. This is not productive at all. You're gonna have to redraw everything. Why don't we just do this in AutoCAD? Well, first of all, sometimes you have to do these kind of tedious paths in order to have a very original drawing. So if we exported the wall fill that we got from an AutoCAD layer, if we exported the wall fill that we got from SketchUp, then it wouldn't look as interesting, as clean, and as crisp how it does when we do it in Illustrator. So some of these things can be repetitive and be tedious, and you're like, oh my gosh, I really don't want to do this because it just takes a lot of time. I would prefer just to render it or do it in Photoshop like we normally do. But believe me, the results are worth it. It just looks different. Then for the trees, I think the trees were one of the elements that gave life, that gave like the whole importance of this site plan, because the trees are going to make the contrast between the regular geometry, the orthogonal geometry of the building, of the other site plans, and the trees are just going to be organic. And the trees, I did them the same way that I created the pattern of the grass and the grass itself. So you go to P for pen tool, you go to P, so you select P on your keyboard for the pen tool. Then I had the Google Earth image right beneath it, just so I could see where the actual trees were, and I wasn't inventing anything new, where I wasn't placing trees where I knew they weren't there. So what I did was I placed the image behind it, I locked it, and then I started with a pen tool drawing the trees on top of it. And obviously this took some time, this took a while, but it was totally worth it. As soon as I had all my trees, I selected a different pattern from the same patterns library that was in Illustrator that I thought was interesting. So I didn't want a very dense pattern, and obviously the important thing here is that we don't have trees that are very generic. You know, sometimes you have these AutoCAD libraries where all the trees are almost the same, and we'll all know these trees. So when you're drawing tree by tree, you can almost be certain that each tree is going to be different, and that is just going to give originality in a different view of the site plan from your way of representing that architecture. Then for the cars, I went on to Pimp My Plan. They have some very nice human figures, plants, trees, everything. And this car was free. This is all free. So if you guys want some very nice entourage for your plans, they have it in AutoCAD and in an Illustrator file, and I think in a PDF file as well. So I downloaded a car and I imported it into Illustrator, and then I copied it and pasted and scaled it. This is just like how you would do in Photoshop. It's honestly very easy, and it was very fast. After you have all of this, the patterns, the textures, the fills, the important vector lines, then I am going to save this file as an Illustrator file. Then I'm going to import it into Photoshop. Here in Photoshop, we aren't going to do much. We're just going to add that final touch, that texture, that nice thing that Photoshop can give us that it's very hard to do in Illustrator sometimes. So what I did first was add some manual shadows. I could have honestly added them from SketchUp, but I wanted them to be done in Photoshop. So what I did is, with the lasso tool, I created and drew, the exact shadows of how I thought it was going to be. I made sure the shadow angle was all the same in all the buildings. And as soon as I had all the shadows selected, I just created a new layer and filled it with black, and filled it with a dark gray, then set it to multiply so you can see the details that are beneath the shadows, but the shadows are also important. And then I downloaded a paper texture online. You can just go to paper texture on Google and you would have a ton of paper textures. So I downloaded a very minimal, soft, kind of brownish paper texture, and then I overlaid it on top, and I set it to multiply. So, and when you set it to multiply, it just receives all the lines, everything that is behind and on top, and it just multiplies itself in with the context. So it's a very nice blend mode. So once you have this kind of base site plan, which is very neat, very clean, there are many options. There are many things you could do. And one of the things I did was create two versions of that plan. So this light plan that you guys are seeing right now, and a dark plan, which I thought was very interesting. So what you do for this light plan is, on top of that paper texture that you imported, since it is on top of everything, you're going to create a mask of the actual floor plan of the actual architecture, and you're going to mask that out. then you're going to set your blend mode to exclusion. So we had it on multiply, then we're going to set it to exclusion. What that is going to do is going to change the values. It's going to make the values opposite. So everything that was light is going to go dark, and everything that was dark was going to go light. So maybe some lines are going to be white, and the background texture is going to be darker. So this was the result, and I thought it's very interesting. And if you, just in case, if you, I don't know, if you were presenting this, if you had a presentation board, you could decide between these two sets of site plans, and honestly, you didn't have to do much. You didn't have to do two entire site plans. It was just different options that Photoshop can give you if you know how to handle it, if you know how to trick your way into it. And finally, as you know, no site plan, a site plan isn't anything without text, without details, without actual information. So we need to include the scale, we need to include the name, we need to include the name of the building, the name of the site plan, and maybe the year it was done. Since this was a more artistic kind of site plan, I only included some text details that I thought were important. And I also typed in the names of the context of the buildings, the streets, which I thought were also important that the person seeing this plan could identify. And this was the final result of the image. These were two images. I added some additional text, some information text, which I thought was very fun, which was very exciting. And to be honest, you guys, like, I have to be very honest with you guys. Sometimes site plans can look very, very interesting, but the majority of it also has to do, apart from representing it well, using the patterns, using Illustrator, using all of this, you also have to have a nice building, right? So this site plan wouldn't have looked as nice if it was a very ugly building, if it wasn't as exemplary and as important as the Louis Kahn Exeter library. If you want your graphics to be nice, you also have to take into account that your building has to be nice. I mean, you can't create a bad building and expect the images to look good. The images to look good. So this applies for renders, for site plans, for sections, for everything. So I recommend that you guys take this into account, that the architecture still has to be very good designed, and the graphic representation skills have to go with that architecture. So I really, really like the result. I think there are many ways, there are many variations of this plan, which I think are very nice, and you guys can do at home. You guys can do with your projects. If you do, tag me on Instagram, send me a DM, show me how the results were, which I would really like to see. And that was it. Thank you guys for watching. Remember to, if you guys want access to this, to the Photoshop file, to the Illustrator file, and to the real-time video, you can go to our Patreon and support us there. Or if you want to learn more about site plans, you can also go to our courses and learn more there. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. It's so weird how everyone used to check out magazines before. And this was like the Pinterest of the time. Like, I'm not really that old, but when I was in school, we used to, we bought magazines because that was where you got inspiration from, or you went to the library and you're like, all right, so I don't know, give me a magazine on the latest architecture competitions, and then you would look on those magazines and you would get inspired by that. So that was like not long ago, when I was in 2012, 2013. And much more before that. But right now, I don't know if anyone looks at magazines. I don't know if architecture students look at magazines anymore. I don't want to sound like old, but I just think it's so different from looking at a Pinterest image. I mean, on Pinterest you can find tons of things, and many more things that you will find in just these 100-page magazine. But how you will see it, how you perceive it, how you will see the colors, how you will understand the image is much more different, right? So on screen, you will see everything is going to look nice. Everything is going to look nice, obviously. But here you will see, what if an image really looks nice or not, and how you can do it. So for example, these covers, I don't know if you guys can see it right now. So these covers are really interesting. I mean, just by the cover design, you can look at how nice it was, because it had many different buildings from different architects, some titles, some text. It has a lot of interesting things that you guys can learn to make your portfolios, your presentation boards, everything. And these are some things that you just can't find on Pinterest. You can't find online anymore. So that is it. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.